Hi, Margot. I can't hear you yet.
Yeah,
Uh,
got the
got you now. So you've had a nice week and all that?
yeah, it's fine. It's good. I launched. I've got a YouTube channel as well. So I stuck a YouTube. I stuck a. It's all about sailing and it's all about boats, and that's difficult to do when my boat at the moment is in the Caribbean and I'm over here in France.
Hmm.
But I sort of try to keep the channel alive by doing something every month or so. So I stuck something out which I thought wouldn't get any views at all, would get very few views. Um, and it's had 4,700 in the first 48 hours, which is about I've got over 16,000 subscribers. So, it's quite a it's because you've got a channel as well, haven't you? But you're sort of desperately trying to get your subscribers up.
Yes, one of the things that I'm sort of building. I'm trying to sort of focus on content at the moment, and then sort of going from there. There's lots of competition, like there is, I imagine, with sailing channels as well. So it's trying to find unique sort of avenues, really.
Yeah, I found I've got a little sort of niche. There are hundreds and hundreds of sailing channels, and I found a sort of a little niche where it does fine. I actually use it to promote. I've written a load of sailing books or books about boats and sailing and things and pilotage mainly. And I started the channel to increase sales because if you write a book, sales are very good at first, and then gradually over the years they fade away, and mine were all fading away. And I thought, oh yeah, so I think it was COVID. I think so about 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, I went, oh, I know, I'll start a YouTube channel and see if that helps. And yeah, it's improved sales enormously. And every time this little one, I put out this 10-minute vid, and sales have increased 300%, 400%. Fading away again now. I mean, only had 2 sales today, but that'll change.
Yeah, sounds like a very nice little business to have, and
Yeah,
an interest as well.
yeah.
I will probably have a couple of questions about sort of your sailing, just because of course it's relevant to your career journey.
Yeah, they're not interested in it, the fans. I mean,
Um,
although although the latest, I don't know, the latest Blu-ray has got. I did a thing for them, and they absolutely insisted in coming out on what was then my brand new boat, which I'd never sailed, never taken out of the harbour. So the film crew insisted on coming out on that, and I took them for a little ride in the Solent.
oh,
And
lovely. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, which season Blu-ray's that one on?
Um, is it 9? It's, yeah, yeah, it's season 9. So it's only
Hmm.
just out. I've only just seen it because
Yeah.
they can't send me stuff in France because I have to pay customs duty on it. So it has to go to my sister and then wait until somebody comes to see me
Ah.
until I get it.
Hmm.
Yeah. Sorry, all yours. Go
Okay.
ahead.
So well, thank you very much, Michael, for agreeing to talk to me about your career and Doctor Who, and we touched on a few other things as well. It's very much appreciated. The first thing I wanted to know was what made you want to get into show business? Because I think originally you started off as an actor.
Yeah, I was. It was sort of bad luck brings good luck. I caught polio when I was about 11, and although academically, a bit like Jeremy Clarkson, I couldn't pass an exam if it threw itself at me. So I came out. I had polio. I was in hospital for a long period of time. So there's no question about passing the exams, and I probably wouldn't have passed them anyway. So I had a friend called Michael Caridia who was in a lot of Norman Wisdom films and went to a stage school, and that sounded to me like a good way to have some fun and earn a living and do nice things. So I said to my parents, I've got this slightly dodgy leg, so I need to go to I need to go to a drama school. I need to go to a drama dancing school to help with my leg because the physiotherapy is fine, but so my mother was all for it and my father wasn't really, but he said, okay, let him go for one term and then we'll see how it goes. So at the age of 12 I went to a stage school called the Italia Conti Stage School in Piccadilly Archer Street, and that was in September, and they used to be a main contributor to a Christmas show called Where the Rainbow Ends, which had dragons and dancing and cadets and things. And I performed that Christmas as an elf and a rainbow child. And my father came to see me at the Royal Festival Hall and realized that I had an enormous talent and was clearly destined for great things. On the benefit of walking across the stage with 26 other kids from Conti's. And so he let me stay on. And the following year, I played the lead in it. And I just did a lot of and it happened. And it just sort of happened. But what was really great, and it's upstairs, not here, but when I was about 13, I think, I got a job in a film called True as a Turtle, which was meant to be a sequel to Genevieve with an actor called John Gregson and Keith Michelle and Elvie Hale and Jim, long time ago. And out of that, I was able to buy myself a Palliard Bolex movie camera, a little 8mm movie wind-up movie camera. So at the age of 13, 14, I started making films. So although my acting career was relatively successful. I mean, I never went to school. I was always doing a job. I was always acting in something. As that faded away, because I grew older, bigger, and stopped looking young and pretty and started looking older when I was sort of 17, 18, I went into stage management, but I still had been and still was making little films. So when BBC Two opened up, I was able to go along there as an ex-actor, stage manager, whatever, and became an ASM. Sorry, that wasn't really what you asked me, but
no, it's a brilliant sort of introduction to how it sort of started. Just touching on your acting career, do you have a favorite role as an actor or a favorite production? A couple of acting highlights.
I suppose. I mean, I played the lead in a show called in an ITV series called Mr. Papingay, The Little Round House, and the sequel to it was called Mr. Papingay's Ship, and I played the lead boy who has all these adventures. And that was sort of quite interesting because Toke Townley played Mr. Papingay, and Toke went on to being in Emmerdale Farm as or Emmerdale as a substantial regular. And later on, sort of years later, I came back and as a director and was directing Toke in it. So, I hadn't seen him for 10 or 15 years. And Jonathan Alwyn was the director of the show, and he became a director and then a producer at the BBC, and he was one of the producers at the BBC that I never worked for. But there I was sort of knocking on Jonathan's door, wanting to direct shows for him when I'd acted for him 20 years before. No, 15 years before, 18 years before. So I suppose those two are good. True as a Turtle was great because it was a mega movie out of Pinewood. And I learned a bit about the real life movie business out of it, behind the scene. I mean, I think I was always I was never a very talented actor. I looked pretty and I knew how to say the words, not trip over the furniture. And I was always more interested in how it went together than I was probably in the acting. And I think and so the same was true a bit of television. I was, more interested in how the cameras worked than how to be a better actor, because I think I suspected I was never going to be a great actor. I was only ever going to be an okay one.
And when it came to becoming staff on the BBC, what was the process of getting your foot in the door with the BBC?
I was so lucky. I mean, I was just just 21, and there was an advertisement in Telegraph, Guardian, something like that, whatever paper I was reading in those days, for BBC Two needing directors, PAs, and ASMs, and the business had just doubled in size with ITV within a few years before. That at first had only been BBC One, and then ITV came along, and so all the people who were in the entertainment industry were getting jobs in ITV, or BBC people were going to ITV or whatever. So the television business doubled in size with BBC and ITV. And then BBC decided to have BBC Two. So it didn't quite double in size again, but it very nearly doubled. So there was a huge demand for people who had knowledge and experience and knew how to do it. And in those days, the BBC wasn't the least interested in your academic qualifications. Didn't care a toss about that. They just wanted people who had been in the business and done the job. And I'd been an actor, I'd been a stage manager, I'd toured, I was in the business. And so getting an interview wasn't really, and in my head, it wasn't really that challenging. I mean, I looked at the 3 jobs and went, I'm not going to get a director's job because, hey, I'm 21 and I've never directed and I've never happened. I might get a PA's job because my qualifications are approaching that, and an ASM's job I should get for sure, because an ASM is just like being a stage manager in the theatre, which I've been lots of times. So I applied for a PA's job, ever optimistic, and I got an interview to be an ASM, and went along, did the board, and got a holiday relief contract of 3 months as a trainee ASM, holiday relief ASM, and it's a 3-month contract. That's it, just 3 months. And at that stage, I was married with 1 child, and the pay was crap. I mean, really. So it's not like today at the BBC. It was appalling. So for poverty wages, half of what I was making selling soap, which was what I was doing, or selling cosmetics, which is what I was doing at the time, I walked away from a motor car and expense account and 3 times the salary, and took a job as a holiday relief ASM on 3 months contract for the BBC, without thinking about it for a second. I mean, it was, no brainer.
Yeah, it was what you wanted to do, and it was worth getting your foot in the door, and
that was it.
Yeah,
it was just what I enjoyed doing. It was what I loved doing. So that, yeah.
So Doctor Who starts to come into your life with the Crusade, with the William Hartnell story, to see a second season. So by this point, I assume you probably were aware of Doctor Who as a show by the time you worked on it.
Yeah, it's a story which others have heard, but I'll repeat it. I mean, my very first day at the BBC, I went in and we were given a note, we were given a clipboard, and we were given instructions. A guy called David Conroy, who went on to be quite an important classic serials producer for a while, was with me. And yes, he asked for a clipboard. So he was going to be a PA. So he clearly had more knowledge than I did of what was required in the job. And I was sent off to trail the ASM on a family show which was being rehearsed just across the road from the television centre at the London Transport Drill Hall, just across Wood Lane from the centre. And I was sent off there, and I walked in there to a show which was called Doctor Who, which had William Hartnell and people rehearsing for, I guess it was the first series of Doctor Who. I think it was the very first series. It wasn't the first episodes, but it was within the first series. And so I was there for a week or a fortnight, trailing the ASM and learning to be an ASM on Doctor Who, oddly enough. But then I went away from that and went on to do other things, amongst which were the Crusades, but amongst sort of many other things as an ASM.
And of course, was it quite nice to, because of course that is science fiction, but of course it's an historical story, so it's not quite the leaps that you would see later on.
Yeah, I mean, in drama department at the BBC in those days was split into three groups. There was plays department, series department, both of which worked out of the television centre on the fourth floor. And then there was serials department, which worked out of Threshold House on Shepherd's Bush Green, which did serials. So we didn't mix that much with series and plays. And in serials department, the shows everybody wanted to work on were classic serials. There were BBC One classics and BBC Two classics. And they were the quality shows. They were what you really, really wanted to do or wanted to work on. And then there was actually Doctor Who, which had become really quite successful. And because it was often indeed historical or science fiction or whatever, and was in chunks of 6, there was 6 part, it was either 4 or 6 episodes. It was a show that was also, people wanted to work on that show because it was an interesting show and it was considered to be of good quality. It was considered to be a quality show. So yeah, first of all, you wanted to work on the classics, and if you couldn't do that, Doctor Who was fine. And if you couldn't do any of those, then you worked on Z-Cars or the Doctors or the Nurses, what was it called? Or indeed there was a bi-weekly serial called Compact, which was about a woman's magazine that went out live one day a week and recorded the second day. And that was interesting to work on, but it wasn't interesting. It was a sort of pick up the baton and run with it job rather than something more exciting like a 6-part or 4-part Doctor Who or a classic serial.
And would you be able to express a preference as to what you worked on, or were you just kind of assigned your projects?
You were assigned. I mean, at my level, by then I was, I think I got into a 2-month extension to my holiday relief contract. Then I sat on a board for a permanent job as an ASM and got that. And then you were very much assigned. You were told you were going to do that. And that depended on actually probably how good you were at your job. I probably didn't realize that at the time, but it just depended on how good an ASM you were as to, the best people got classic serials or Doctor Who, and the lesser good people got other shows.
Do you have any memories of meeting William Hartnell and the cast? William Hartnell, William Russell, did you get to meet them at all on the Crusade?
The Crusades was, remind me, I think the Crusades was directed by, who was it directed by? You're supposed to know. It was directed by a mate of mine, actually. I was sort of ASM stroke PA. Vic Ratellis was the real PA, and I was a sort of associate PA because it was so much work and it was quite a long show. What came out to me out of the Crusades was when I went off to do the director's course, I was able to ask John Aberneri and Jean Marsh to act in my director's course, little film at the end of the course. And Jean I'd met during the Crusades. Well, she was the lead actress in the Crusades, and she came and did my director's course for me.
Lovely. And because Jean Marsh, what was Jean like as an actress and a person?
Oh, I mean, lovely lady. I mean, a very nice professional lady. I mean, as you know, she went on to create Upstairs, Downstairs, which, I'm absolutely delighted for her. And that had actually, and what a nice lady, because to come along and do something for a young director at the directing school, it's never going to be broadcast, and you're going to have to come to rehearsals 3 or 4 times in a week and then spend a half a day in a studio recording it, and you're doing that for 60 quid, I think was what they got paid, which was like, even in those days, 60 quid for a week's work is, so, I mean, immensely nice of her to, what a nice lady to do it, what a kind lady to do it, for somebody like me, who she only knew as an ASM stroke PA on Dougie Camfield directed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what was Douglas Camfield like to work with?
Dougie was lovely. I mean, I have been his ASM and I've been his PA. We lived across the park we lived very close to each other in Twickenham. Dougie, I learned a lot about organization from Dougie. He was a very organized person. He was big into lists, and he was big into putting it in writing, sending out memos, which came from he was in the army, and I suspect for more than just national service. And he had learned in the army that you need to disseminate information. You need to tell people what's happening. You need to make sure that people know what it is that you want. And one of the things I learned from Dougie was to keep people informed, was to make lists, keep people informed, and have meetings so that people knew what was happening. Good guy.
Yeah. And did you meet Julian Glover on either on Doctor Who or other things?
Yeah. I met Julian, I think, on Doctor Who. He was later with I was later with London Management, and Julian was Jean Diamond, and Julian was with the same management. So we actually had dinner together one night at Jean's house. So yes, I met Julian.
Oh, wonderful. Did you ever meet William Hartnell at all?
Yeah, I mean, I did. Well, I mean, I was an ASM on that original Doctor Who. Then I did a Dalek story, which Chris Barry directed as a PA with William Hartnell. Really nice guy, really smart, clever, expected to be respected, expected to be treated properly. I mean, you called him, certainly as an ASM, I always called him Mr. Hartnell. I would never call him William. As a PA, I think I mixed it, but I certainly didn't. I certainly didn't push it. But I found him a delight to work for. I know other people have not found that, but no, I found him the ultimate professional and realistic, and a pleasure to work with.
As an assistant floor manager on because of course the budget wasn't that huge for Doctor Who, and the studio that they were signed to was often Studio D, Lime Grove, etc. So it wasn't always the best facilities that they had. Did you find that it affected the production a little bit, or was it kind of pretty efficient back then?
Budgets for drama have always been a problem for the BBC. Drama is a bit of a lost leader. They can put on Top of the Pops, costs them almost nothing because everybody wants to be on it, and they're going to get 12 million viewers or something. Drama wasn't necessarily like that. You could put on drama and get relatively small viewing figures. So, you could photograph a football match and you just need to send 5 cameras out there, and you've got a football match with X millions watching it, whereas drama is not true. So I suspect the BBC, also controllers, the way it worked in those days was the controller of a channel would have what he ideally would like to put out on his channel in order to get the maximum possible viewers Monday to Sunday. And of course, the controller had only got so much money. He had got a limited budget. So he would like to have Match of the Day and all the rest of it. But in drama, he would want to have whatever the Cheap and Cheerful were. But also prestigiously, he would like to have classic serials and things like that. So he would say, yeah, I want my classic serial. And the producer and the head of drama would put in the budget for the classic serial. I did A Tale of Two Cities, he would put in his budget for and the controller would say yes, and his accountant would say, but you can only afford this for it. So the controller would go back to head of drama and say, yes, I'd like to have that classic serial, but I can only do it if you do it for this amount of money. And because the head of drama wanted him to have the classic serial, the head of drama would agree and go back to the producer and say, that's what. So Doctor Who, which was a successful early evening show, I think was it Saturday nights on
Saturday nights, yeah.
Saturday nights on BBC One, was worth a certain amount of money. Certainly, the controller wanted to have it, but he only wanted to have it at a price. And of course, the reason there were so many modern day Doctor Who's was because to have a historic one costs a lot of money, because all the props have to be specially bought in, the costumes have to be. So if you do a modern day one, that's why Barry Letts had so many unit stories, was because they were modern day and they didn't cost very much money. So there always were budget constrictions. And if you were working on a Doctor Who that was present day, and I don't think I ever worked on a present day Doctor Who. If you ever worked on a present day Doctor Who, the budget was fine. If you worked on one that was futuristic or in the past, the budget was tight.
Right. So that was one reason why they probably scrapped the historicals after William Hartnell. They scrapped the historicals. So occasionally you go back in time, but primarily it was the historicals kind of sort of faded out, and unfortunately, because they were perhaps some of my favorite ones, but from what you're saying, it's obvious why they disappeared.
That's right. And they tended, I think they tended then to be present day, didn't they? Or
or be futuristic, or just perhaps modern Doctor Who still very much present day Earth, sort of, because of course it.
Are they present day Earth?
Yeah,
I must confess, I never did watch it regularly. I watched it occasionally. Hey, at my age, I was more interested, in my 20s, I was more interested in, other things than necessarily Doctor Who. So whenever I knew I was going to direct one, I would absolutely start watching it again, and I'd probably even read the scripts from the previous series, but I didn't watch it, I didn't watch it every week.
Oh, yeah. And so you move on to work on a couple of Patrick Troughton stories, Power of the Daleks, Fury of the Deep. Any highlights from those two?
Well, I'd worked again with Chris Barry. I'd worked previously with Patrick on something called Moonfleet and Katrina, in which Patrick played one of the sailors, he was one of the supporting cast. I don't think he wasn't the lead, but he was one of the supporting cast. So I had worked with, he was deep into dinghy sailing. So I was an ASM on that show, and there was a scene where a load of sailors had to row a whaler ashore, a longboat ashore, a period boat ashore. And I was sent out as coxswain because I could operate the walkie-talkie back to base, and I was to control them, only to discover that none of them could row. So Patrick and I, between us, taught the five actors also how to row and how to organize it, so that we could just row ashore. Because I think Chris sort of assumed, I think he didn't think about it. He just thought, yeah, everyone can row a boat, or he didn't even think rowing a boat was a challenge. But of course, for 5 or 6 people, it is necessary to have a certain minimal skill in order to get the boat to move through the water. So yeah, and Patrick sailed Enterprises, and I had a mirror dinghy at that stage. So I then worked. So Fury in the Deep. That was the first time a director. The director was Hugh David, and he actually was so pressed for time on it. He sent me off with a second unit to direct a few shots or even a few shots with actors in it as a second unit while we were filming. So I was always grateful to Hugh for that, because that was my first chance to do a little bit of directing. And then later on, Rex Tucker did exactly the same thing, not on a Doctor Who, but on a classic serial.
And there's a nice little rowing sequence in Fury of the Deep, I think, in the first episode. Have you seen any of the animation reconstructions of?
Yeah, I was invited. I think I went along and did. I think I did a voiceover. I think I did a commentary on that for the BBC, and so, or certainly one or two episodes of it. I don't remember exactly. But yeah, I mean, that rowing ashore was actually a bit of a cock up, which was my fault. I was the PA on that, and it was Hugh said the TARDIS was meant to land on a cliff top. Okay, it wasn't meant to land on the sea. In the script, it landed on the cliff top, and Hugh said, "Oh, it would be a rather good idea if we." And there were helicopters in it, and the show had a budget for one helicopter, and it actually had quite a big budget. It was meant to be the star show of that season. So we're going to have a helicopter. So Hugh went, "Oh, it'd be great if it landed on the sea. How can we do that?" And I think or visual effects said, "Well, there is a mini TARDIS." And there was a baby TARDIS, which was about a meter and a half tall, because the main TARDIS, the real TARDIS, it took 6 prop men to move it. I mean, it was never designed to go on location. It was a nightmare. So if you just wanted a TARDIS in the distance, you employed this mini TARDIS. It's not Hugh used it a lot. Hugh was the only director I know who actually used it, however. So we went, well, I guess we could put the baby TARDIS on the end of a piano wire, and the helicopter could lower it onto the sea. So that was discussed, and that was thought to be a good idea. And then we went, well, you sit in an office, there's 4 of you in the office. And so my next question was, well, Hugh, how are they going to get ashore? And I said, we could have he said, well, they could have a boat. There wasn't really room in the TARDIS for a boat. So I said, well, why don't we have an Avon? Why don't we have a dinghy? Why don't we have an Avon dinghy, a blow-up dinghy? Because you can blow them up quite quickly, and it can have an outboard, and they can go ashore in the dinghy. And he went, yeah, that sounds fine, Michael. Okay, yeah, all right. So I got onto Avon's and said, we'd like to use one of your dinghies for this sequence of going ashore. How quickly can you blow it? Can it be blown up in the studio? Because maybe we'd just like the Doctor to, stick an airline on it or something and blow it up. And they said, well, and I said, it would need to happen within about 15 seconds. And they said, no way. If it does that, it ices. So I don't know, there were all sorts of technical reasons why it couldn't be done. So I went, okay. And I explained that to you, and he said, no, never mind. That's no mind. We'll just cut round that. We'll have them getting the bag out in the studio, and then we'll cut to them motoring ashore. I went, fine. So I ordered up the dinghy from Avon, and I got them to supply me, and I got another company to supply an outboard motor. And I ordered up a fuel tank I knew about outboard motors and things because I sailed. I ordered up a couple of gallons of petrol and a funnel, and got it all there, and it arrived on the beach, and I had totally forgotten to order the bracket that goes on the back of an Avon dinghy, which enables you to fit an outboard motor on it. And there we are on this beach in Margate going, shit, forgot the bracket, forgot to order the bracket. And Patrick, God bless you, Patrick was always nothing fazed Patrick. He was a consummate professional. He went, I'll row it. I'd much rather do that anyway. I'll row the dinghy. Don't worry about it all, Hugh, Michael, I'll row the dinghy. And so he did. So in the freezing cold on that Margate beach, he and Fraser and Debbie, was it Debbie?
Debbie, yes.
Yeah, Debbie, Frozen, all got in the dinghy. Pat wrote it out, turned it round, and wrote it back in. So yeah, that was Patrick.
Yes, good little. Certainly, the animation. It's like a great sequence to work.
And I think the film still exists. I think the film of him rowing ashore exists. There's some. I've got a feeling it could be on my Series 8 Blu-ray. Could it?
Whether they found something since, because I think the only bits that they had from Fury of the Deep that's on the recent Blu-ray is some of the climatic sequence with the foam, and I think that was the only footage I think that actually exists.
Then I have seen, yeah, I can't remember because people send me stuff when I do interviews and I don't always know what, I say I don't look at all of the Blu-rays. There is certainly film existing of Patrick and Debbie and Fraser on the beach when there's foam on the beach and him using the sonic screwdriver for the first time. That's around. I don't know what it's on, but I've certainly seen that film recently.
Oh,
indeed, it was in the animation. Yeah.
Do you remember much about the climatic sequence? Because, of course, all the foam in the studio, it must have been quite
absolutely. And it cost me my job. I sound like an accident-prone PA. I was actually quite a good PA, but I guess if you're adventurous, you get into trouble. The foam was preordained by the producer on the and I think the producer may have been Innes Lloyd. I can't quite remember, but it was part of the package that Hugh inherited, was this foam which was used for putting out aircraft fires. And so one of the things that happened in pre-production was we all trotted along to the company that manufactures the foam, and they had an area where they set light to it all, and they pumped foam on it, and the fire went out. And the beauty of the foam was that all it needed was, it just made foam. You just needed water, fresh water, and foam came out. And I foolishly didn't equate foam with, I thought foam as being what you get in the, I just didn't equate it with water. Okay, I didn't think foam is a really, really wet substance. So what I should have done in Studio A or at Ealing Film Studios, where I should have had the floor covered in tarpaulins and waterproof material before the sets were built for doing those sequences. And I failed to do that. So we had foam everywhere, and out of the foam came a lot of water, and out of the water came a lot of buckling, expensive flat wooden floors in the film studio. So theoretically, when you're in a studio, you're not working for drama department, you're working for studio management as a floor manager. So I got my knuckles severely wrapped for that. But I got brownie points for all the other stuff I did in getting the foam onto the bridge, onto the forts in the Thames estuary and things by drama department. So hey.
Yeah, I think it's one of those classic stories. Another one, of course, being Power of the Daleks. Christopher Barry directing that one.
Yeah.
Any memories of Power of the Daleks?
That was done. Graham Harper, who is a very well-known Who director now, was my ASM on that. And he and I went to the same drama school. Graham was 1 year behind me at Italia Conti's. I remember vaguely William coming to me and saying, Michael, I'd like clearance as soon as I came to him with a phone message during tea break. There was a phone call for him during tea break on one of the recordings at Hammersmith. And he came to me and he said, Michael, they want me to do this job they want me to do this opening of a thing in Birmingham. And he said, I'm going to phone them back. Do you reckon you can clear me sharp at 10 o'clock? I'd be grateful if you could do that, in which case I'll do this job. And I went, yeah, sure, William. Hopefully we're not going to overrun. And the moment I hear I'll clear you and you can head for your motor car. And he went, fine. And he picks up the phone, phoned these people back, and he said, okay, provided, to his agent, I think, he said, provided they put me in the 5-star hotel and provide a car to pick me up at 10 o'clock at the studios and give me the fee that you've said, I'm willing to do the job, and put the phone down. I thought, actually, that's the way to live, isn't it? I mean, that's, I was quite impressed. I was quite impressed. I mean, the thought of having a car drive you from Hammersmith in those days, a car picking up and then being put up at a 5-star hotel and getting paid a fee so that the next morning he could open a shop or whatever it was great. And so, he came to me, so I was impressed. And he went, okay, Michael, that's great. And I went, fine. So we did the recording and we actually finished at 5 minutes to, and, I said to Chris, are we clear? And he went, clear. And I went, yep, William, go for it. And William was away. He was the consummate professional on the show. He was, it was interesting that people like him and people like John Pertwee and Pat Troughton all had valuable, important careers before Doctor Who came along. Many, many subsequent doctors didn't, or hadn't, or haven't. Those three had all been very, very well established in their jobs long before Doctor Who happened. So for them, it was a job, an important job, and they were professionals, so they treated the job very seriously. But it wasn't all of their lives. It was just an event within their acting careers. And in a way, I think that makes their performances almost better than for people whom it is the greatest event in their acting career. I think.
Oh yeah, having that experience you can bring it into, and it's I'd agree. Did you encounter actor Michael Craze, and do you remember Michael at all?
I certainly remember Michael Craig, and I think what would I have worked with?
He was on Power of the Daleks. He played Ben, Michael Craze.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's Power of the Daleks was a 6-part show. It would have represented 3 or 4 months of my life, along with Chris Barry and Graham. And we did. It was either a 4-parter, 6-parter.
It was a 6-parter.
It was 6-parter. It had the Dalek factory in it. It had. I think when you're the ASM, I think when you're the PA, oddly enough, as opposed to the ASM is in the rehearsal room all day, every day with the directors and the actors. He is the stage manager and he is running the stage management part of the show. The PA is not in the rehearsal room all day, every day. The PA is there sorting higher level technical problems for the production during the week, and the PA will turn up at the read-through, might stay for the blocking just to see how it's going, and will then clear off back to the office and be doing the administration to make sure the production gets on the air, at the time, gets into the studio floor at the time it's meant to be. So I would probably go back to the studio and watch a bit of rehearsals during the show. I would then watch a run through so that I knew who had to be cued and what had to be happening. I would then check. I would be the one who I would make the camera plan for the director. The director would have you a plan with his rough camera positions drawn on it, and you would take the flimsy, which is you would take the flimsy camera plan, which is what the lighting director is then going to put the position of all the lights he wants lowered in and placed in the studio on, and you would take that flimsy and place all the camera positions on it for the director. The ASM would give you a plan with the furniture drawn on it, which are all the furniture positions where they're going to be on the sets. So you could spend, as a PA, you can spend a day doing that. So one's direct involvement with the actors during the rehearsal period was nowhere near as great as your involvement if you were an ASM. So yes, I knew all the actors. Of course I knew them. I met them, talked to them. But probably in the canteen when we broke for tea, I would be chatting to the director or to the ASM rather than chatting to the actors. So yes, I met them, but unless they were mates, I didn't have that close contact.
More in the background, sort of thing. And of course, you progressed to director on the Colony in Space, and I take it Barry Letts brought you into that.
Yeah.
Was it quite a natural progression, given your experience, then direct?
No, I mean, because you're a certainly it helped with Barry because he knew. What did I PA'd that was a Barry produced show? I can't think. Because that was I think when you finish the director's course, you end up with this little roll of film, which is your drama exercise, and that little roll of film is, or a VT, somehow it is passed round all the producers at the BBC in drama department for them to see what directors off the what embryonic directors who've done the director's course have done. From coming off the course in drama department, you then got a Z-cast to do. So the first thing I did was I immediately got a couple of Z-casts to direct. And then I went back on the floor as a PA, and then I got then I got 3 or 4 doctors to direct, and then I got nurses. What was that series? So it was all about nurses, young nurses. Anyway, so I got to direct as a PA. I got to direct half a dozen shows before Barry offered me Doctor Who, and they were all not run of the mill, but I'd obviously done all right directing those. They're not soaps, of course, but they are series where it is one episode a week. Serials where there's one episode a week. They're continuing serials where there's one episode a week. And clearly producers are looking around. Clearly producers are always looking around for Steven Spielbergs, aren't they? They're looking around for the 22-year-old, 25-year-old director who's going to make them their fantastic show. So, yeah. So I guess that's why. So Barry decided to take a chance on me, and it was taking a chance. He knew I could direct. He knew I could do it in the time for the money. He knew technically I knew how to do it. And he knew, yeah. So he took a bit of a risk, but not that much, because you can either have someone who is old and established and been doing it forever, but isn't going to surprise you, or you can have somebody new and embryonic who just might be better than the rest of them.
And there's quite a lot of location work on Quarry in Space. Was it, and not the most glamorous locations, quarries, that sort of, and you've got quite lots of vehicles and complicated stuff. Was that a bit of a nightmare at times?
Well, the real nightmare was that we were doing it in winter. We were doing it in January, February. So sunlight came up at 9:30, 10 o'clock, and dusk came up at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was bloody cold, freezing. So that was the big challenge. You didn't even get a full filming day in. And I think the PA, who was Nick John, Caroline John's brother, I think Nick did a deal with the crew and said, hey, can we just work solidly through these 6 hours, and that's it. And I think I don't have a clear memory of it, but I think that's what we did in the end. I think, or we just had a very foreshortened lunch break of half an hour or something. So that was the challenge. The rest of it, yeah. The trick of television direction, certainly in those days, was having plan B. The trick was, as plan A dissolved before your eyes, you immediately went, okay, what we're going to do is this. Because what you can't do is have 70 people standing behind you while you'll go, oh dear, we're going to hold the fighters full of mud and we can't do it, and I've planned all the. You can't do that. You've just got to go, okay, what we're going to do then is we're going to do this. So you have to be able to think on your feet and spin on a coin, spin on a spot. I'm mixing my metaphors. That's in television in those days. That was a skill that a director needed to survive, to be able to, in a blink, pull something out of the hat.
Yeah. Well, did you always prefer studio shoots because of the unpredictable nature of locations? Was it always a bit nicer to be in a controlled environment?
Oh, I mean, filming is always, making movies is what you always want to do.
Yeah.
Studio shoots, because you are actually, I think on location filming, you can actually be creative on the spot. I mean, because things are fluid and flexible and different, and things change, and you stand there and go, God, that looks really good, or I can do that. And because you've got a direct relationship with the cameraman, so that you're looking to frame up nice looking, good looking shots or interesting shots, and the cameraman is there. And if you have a simpatico, then you both want to do things that are more than just shoot a close up or shoot. You want to make this. You want to tell a story with the camera, and there's only one camera. When you go into the studio, it is totally pre-planned. I was talking about the camera plan with all the camera positions on it. Your job in the studio is to have a plan that is absolutely fixed by the sets and the shots that you put into a camera script and the cutting points that you put into a camera script, and your job is to make that work. Of course, you've got to be able to come up with a plan B when it doesn't work, but basically your job is to make a fully functioning plan work, function. And your job on location is to follow a plan, but have the flexibility to take advantage of whatever may be offered to you.
Yeah, it does seem like location shooting is a bit more personal because if you're doing in the studio, you're in the gallery, it's because of the vision mixing with different cameras, and you're kind of a bit removed from it. So it must be a bit frustrating that you can't really be on the floor in a way.
No, I mean, being on the floor is not. I mean, exactly in your head as a director in the gallery, you know exactly where the cameras are, you know exactly where everybody is, you can see exactly what very occasionally things get in such a muddle that you need to come down on the floor and sort it out. But in a whole day of shooting, you might do that twice, maybe, that's all. On location, I mean, I made a 50-minute part film called Hideaway, which was shot all on location in Camden, in Derbyshire. I mean, 6 hours of film for one show as the only director doing it. And that was an absolute joy. I absolutely just loved it. It was marvelous. Absolutely marvelous. The cameraman, Nigel, the camera operator, Nigel, and the camera lighting man, the lighting cameraman, and the guy who did the lights, Elmer Cozzi, and Nigel, the operator, we all got on very well. And so it was just enormous problems. I mean, enormous problems, not of our making outside the production, but it was a pleasure. It was a joy. So for me, if I could have had a lifetime making films, I'd have had a lifetime making films rather than studio-bound productions. But that's not to say I hated the studio-bound productions. I didn't. You just asked me which I preferred.
Oh yeah, yes, different discipline as it were.
Yeah.
I was wondering about Roger Delgado, as of course the definitive master. What you remember of working with Roger?
Oh, Roger was a pleasure. I mean, apart from being a very nice man, he was a very, very brave man. I mean, Roger couldn't swim, so in the Sea Devils, when he had to be in a submersible survival suit floating about in the ocean, I mean, what courage it takes when you are terrified of the sea and you're being asked to get into getting into the ocean beside a hovercraft, and we're offshore. You know, we're half a mile offshore. We're not next door to the beach. We're half a mile offshore. He was a very brave man. He was a very fine actor as well. He had immense, and he and John, of course, were such good friends. They were. So it was, doing the dueling scene with them was a real pleasure, because they were both old school actors who, I guess, at RADA or wherever it was, they trained, they'd learned to fence as part of in those days, that was part of an actor's little bag of tricks, along with riding a horse, was being able to fence and being able to dance a bit. Yeah, so Roger was the consummate professional, delightful man, charming man. Had a lovely time with him. Yeah.
Good. And John Perch, of course, very much an action doctor. And I take it John was nice to work with as well.
Oh, John was lovely. I mean, he and I became very, very good friends. I mean, John, I trusted John and John trusted me. I mean, we worked very well together. I mean, we were both after the same thing, which was to make the show as good as possible, and making the show as good as possible also meant making John look as good as possible. So that suited him fine. But when, for example, in the Maggots show, The Green Death, there was a sequence which John had spoken to Barry about when the scripts were being done, where he wanted to dress up as a washerwoman, as a cleaning lady. And it was a comedy act, which apparently he'd done. I'd never seen it. He'd done. And I didn't know, Barry didn't say to me, John has asked me to put this in the script. I just got the script and there was this sequence. And I went, I have got no idea how to present this whatsoever. So I went to John and went, John, I've got no idea how to present this whatsoever. He said, Michael, I asked Barry to put this in the script, so that's how it got there. I've done this 100 times and it works like this. And so he proceeded to show me exactly how it worked, and I proceeded to photograph it. And it was, all John telling me how that little comedy act worked out.
And just coming back to the Sea Devils, I don't think they were that popular monster at the time, although they recently come back in the new series, I think, to great effect. But were you kind of happy with the Sea Devils in terms of their design, and did you think it
Sorry,
worked?
which one are you talking about? My Sea Devils?
Yeah, your Sea Devils, yes, yeah.
Oh no, I mean, I was absolutely the instigator of that design. I mean, you get the Sea Devil, so it can be absolutely anything. I desperately didn't want to have yet another monster in a rubber suit, which was basically all the rubber suits were skin diving suits with latex applied to them. I just didn't want that. I didn't want just a monster head. So I went to a lot of trouble to find a creature which could reasonably be from a civilization that lived underneath the sea. Sea turtles. And I'd actually met a sea turtle once while I was delivering a boat to somewhere. And I looked at lots and lots of books, and I looked at lots and lots of sea creatures, real life sea creatures. And I looked at turtles, sea turtles, which are big, they have big faces, they can walk on land, they can swim underneath the sea, they're amphibious, in other words, and they're clever, they're intelligent, and they've got mouths, their beaks that can fight. And it seemed to me that if an amphibious civilization were going to evolve, it would evolve out of something like turtles. Not fish, turtles. So I got these pictures in books. I used to get them. The BBC had a vast library at that stage, so you could get your assistant to get on the phone to the BBC library, and all these reference books would turn up. So a reference book turned up with a picture of a turtle, and I went along to costume design and vis effects and the people that were going to create the mask, the headpiece, and said, turtles, that is what we're going to base this on. And I made a whole logic out of, I didn't want them to have guns. Why on earth would they have AKs? Why on earth would they have guns like we have? So I just went, they would have a different sort of gun. So I said, yeah, I think they're just going to have discs that fire a flash. And I think I'd done not robots. I think I'd done Cybermen before that. I think I can't remember.
Because Revenge of Cybermen would have been Tom Baker's. That would have been a couple of years after.
Okay. So
yeah.
I went like that, and then I went, how do they fire? Now Barry is very keen on using electronic effects, and I'm much more of the school of I like real explosions. I like real, I like stuntmen, whatever. So I went, no, and I went back from my theatre days. We used to use flash powder for effects because it goes flash and there's a bit of smoke and that's it. So I went, I'd like the guns to fire with flash powder. So I had the idea we had these round guns that they just held their hand up and there was this round. So what evolved were these round guns with a hole in the middle, and they pressed a trigger, fired a battery, which ignited the flash powder. And then I'd have an effect at the other end, which I think, if I remember rightly, was sometimes also a flash powder or a detonator in the sort behind it. So I was also, I didn't want them. I don't think costume department really, I don't think they spent so much money building this rubber suit that they'd run out of budget. Okay, they'd spent, costume department, vis effects, had spent all their money on the Sea Devil heads and these costumes, and only ever were 6 of them, but they all cost a substantial amount of money each. So there was no money for a costume, and they were hoping that I would, like the directors before me, accept a guy wandering around in a rubber suit. And I didn't want that, not just because it's a guy wandering around in a rubber suit, but because if you look at civilizations, as civilizations progress, as mankind progressed, they wear more and more clothes. One of the signs of civilization is that people put on, it doesn't matter what the temperature is, they put on more and more clothes as part of their civilization. You don't get highly intelligent, highly developed civilizations running around with no clothes on. Doesn't happen. Or just with loincloths. Doesn't happen. As they progress, they put on more clothes. So this was clearly meant to be a civilization that had developed under the ocean, out of the Earth. It's not meant to have been jetted in from outer space. It is something which is, and maybe there could be, for all we know, down there is a civilization. I mean, we know nothing about what's 3 miles deep, 5 miles deep. So I wanted them to have, so I arrived on location. We arrived on location the very first day. There's a morning is to set up, shooting afternoon, and they show me for the very first time the guy in the suit with the head on and the long necks, which were part of, and we were able to integrate the long necks, which are part of what a turtle has, which is a, and I said, well, where's the costume? And she said, and I know there was no money, and I know there were no costumes. Looking around this dressing room in this hotel ballroom on location somewhere, there were no costumes, and there was a roll there, and there was a roll of habitat curtaining, those square curtains with things, And the brilliant costume lady said, "Of course there are costumes, Michael." And she took a roll of this netting, unrolled it a bit, cut it, folded it in half, cut a circle in the top, put it over the Sea Devil's head, tied a belt around it, and went, "They've got costumes."
Mm.
And I actually thought it was brilliant. I thought it was actually, because if you were amphibious, if you follow my logic that civilizations, it would clearly be a costume you could be amphibious in.
Yes.
I thought the costumes were brilliant.
Mm.
So I was somewhat saddened to see the costumes that the Sea Devils had in the modern Doctor Who, which I did watch because people emailed me and said, "Do you know that Sea Devils are coming out?" Blah, blah, blah. So I sat and watched it for about 20 minutes, and I couldn't follow the logic. I couldn't follow, it looked like something out of the Pirates of the Caribbean. It was just I couldn't follow the logic. I couldn't follow the logic.
Yeah, there's a certain sort of continuity, of course, but it is, yes, it's not quite. I know what you're alluding to. Yeah. The Green Death, of course, is one of those stories that seems to become more and more relevant with the eco message. Is that a story that you're quite proud of because of sort of it does have a sort of depth to it?
Robots of Death.
Sorry, the Green Death. And I was thinking about
the Green Death. Sorry,
eco message.
Yeah, the Green Death. Yes, I mean I always enjoyed working on Doctor Who. Okay, so I might go off and do other things, and I did go off and do other things, but it was always a pleasure to come and work on Doctor Who because you were given a project. Okay, you were given a complete. It was your show, and you got the scripts and made whatever comments it was, observations, and talked about script development with the producers and the story editors. But then the way you imagine the show, like I was talking about, the way I imagine the Sea Devils or whatever. So the Green Death was, it was a show with a lot of challenges, not least of which was I had to meet Unit, who I'd never worked with Unit, and I confess I hadn't been watching the show, so I didn't really know who Unit were. I didn't know who these people were. So I had to go into the archives and watch it, pick out a couple of shows to see what they all did. The Green Death it had a lot of challenges. What I liked very much was the concept of this huge conglomerate taking over the world. And it was a bit further away in those days, but actually today in 2023, huge conglomerates taking over the world are not, they are bigger than many nations. They're bigger than a lot of nations, actually, come to think of it. So I was quite keen on that. I wanted to have, I think we had a logo. Was it a Z or something? I can't remember what the logo was, but I know I was very keen on the logo and developed the logo very early. I insisted on having this logo absolutely everywhere, so it felt like a conglomerate. And I wanted to have some printed up and put it on the side of a freight train. Yeah, a freight train. Ron was my PA, and we discussed it, how to get a railway company to let us, so we could just do a shot at, and in the end I gave it up because it was just impossible to get, British Rail or whoever it was to, it's going to cost too much. But the logo, I was really interested in the whole conglomerate storyline. I was interested in the coal mining development. I mean, I found the whole coal mine thing. Until I went off sailing, I was never very good mechanically. If I took a spanner to a car, it cost a fortune for me to have a mechanic fix what I'd broken. it changed. But I wasn't very good. So things like, what's a cotter pin? You remember there was the cage. Somebody takes a cotter pin out and a cage drops. I can't remember all the details of the script. But things like that, I just didn't know what a cotter pin was, or I didn't even know how mining worked. I didn't understand how it all worked, and so it was absolutely magical. We went to this pit in Derry, this working pit, and I persuaded the pit manager to let me and the PA, and I think the ASM and the designer, I think 3 or 4 of us, go underground and actually go to a pit face, and that was absolute eye-opener, amazing. I'm not sure. Well, it taught me what a cotter pin was, certainly, and it taught me, and that was. Going to that pit face was one of the experiences of my life. I mean, it's an experience where the blackness, the guy who was taking us, you went down to this yard where there were railway trains and ponies and offices, and it's like a mini Paddington. I mean, and not that mini, huge, and brightly lit and all the rest of it. And so that's a shock, having gone down in this cage for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, descending relatively fast all the time. And then you get into this huge cavern of offices, and then you got on this little railway train. And there are branches off the railway line, but you go down this railway line for half an hour at 15 miles an hour, 20 miles an hour or something. So can you imagine the distance underground that this involves? And then you get off the train, and you still haven't got to the pit face. The guy then takes you walking down tunnels, which you can see the steel girders bending on either side. You can see and at one stage the guy said, stop here. He said, now, we'd all got pit helmets and lights and things. He said, turn your lights off. And we turned our lights off, and the blackness was total. I've never in my life seen blackness that was like that. There was just no light whatsoever, no ambient light whatsoever anywhere. Quite an amazing experience. And then we got to the face where there's a machine running up and down the face, and the guys are working on their hands and knees, or at least bent over the whole time. And one of the problems the coal bore has is that in order to keep the roof up and in order to keep pace with this machine, they have to keep moving these pit props forward the whole time as the machine cuts into the face. So they have to move the machine forward, and then they have to prop up the ceiling behind. And there's meant to be a pit prop every meter, every yard. And the guys are being asked to lift 100-weight, bent over because they can't stand upright, and shift 100-weight prop forward and put up the things on it. And the weight of that is, they're going, yeah, well, 1.5 meters will do. Of course, because it is physically so tough. And as they're moving all these props forward, the ceiling is falling down behind them at the back. I mean, that was an immense experience for me. And yeah, I had incredible admiration for the guys doing the work, and they were very proud of their work, and they technically they're smart cookies. It's not an environment where you can be stupid in. It's and they didn't get paid. Their pay didn't start until they got to the cliff face, to the coal face. So they would come into the pit, dress up in all this gear, do all the stuff, walk from the changing room to the cage, get in the cage, travel down, get on the railway line, walk for half an hour, and they wouldn't start to be paid before they got to the face. And you go, no wonder they went on strike.
Well, yes, indeed. Yes, it's a dangerous job and underappreciated. But I suppose that's the lovely thing about working on TV and films, you learn things like that, and you
Yeah, I mean,
get
not
an
a lot of people know
education.
that.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I just want to talk about Death of the Daleks very briefly, because of course you get a chance to have your own spin on a very iconic monster. How did your approach to that, and is it difficult because you have a sort of a legacy with certain characters? Do you have to be quite sort of? Does it spook you perhaps slightly?
Yes. True. That was with Exelons, wasn't it? Was it with?
Yeah, I think it was the two races
Yeah.
fighting. Yes.
Yeah. Clearly, you're not going to do anything with the Daleks. I mean, it was a slightly, Terry Nation wasn't thrilled with the show because he said I made the Daleks look foolish, but they were impotent. I mean, they it wasn't me; it was the story. I didn't try to do anything with Daleks that hadn't been done before. I mean, there were things like they had their spaceship, so I did that with Chroma Key, CSO, in the studio by having a couple of pillars in the studio that were real, and then having a blue cloth behind that had painted on it the outside of a Dalek spaceship. There was the problem. All I tried to do with the Daleks was make them work as well as I'd seen them work, and they're an iconic monster. They're an iconic persona in Doctor Who, and it would be foolish. I didn't knowingly try to change anything. There were problems because it took place in a sandpit, and the one thing a Dalek can't do is run on sand. I mean, it just bogs down. So there were problems like, how do you get a shot of the Doctor and his companions as being escorted by Daleks through a quarry which is full of sand? So that was a problem that had to be solved. There weren't enough Daleks, and Barry knew there wasn't, and he arranged a trip for us to Pinewood to look at the feature film Daleks from the Peter Cushing film to see if we could use those, because we hadn't got the money. Daleks were quite expensive to build. They cost. There wasn't the money in the budget to have more Daleks, so we went to look at those. But when we got there, the design was so different. The whole concept was so different. We just couldn't use them. There was just no question of using them. So I think what happened was, we agreed to have a Dalek that was non-operative, where somebody didn't have to sit in it, where it would just sit there. It had no electric. I think we could afford that. So I think maybe on my show there was enough budget to have one non-operating Dalek. So there's one Dalek around in all those shots that doesn't do anything. It just sort of sits there. But no, I didn't try to do anything. I think I was more interested in the Exelons, challenging like the big snake thing that came up out of the lake. I'm talking about the right show, aren't I?
Yes, I
Yes,
believe
I
you
am.
are. Yeah,
Snake thing. Yeah, the snake thing was a technical challenge that was a lot of fun. Getting the Daleks to move with John and things. The way of making a Dalek move on location in the past had been, you put down blockboard. You put down a sheet of blockboard, a bit of 12 by 9 or something, 6 by 8 blockboard, and he could then just move a few feet. But that wasn't enough for me. So I thought, well, they've got to move some distance. So I thought about Elimac dollies. Elimacs are the dollies which you mount cameras on, which go on railway lines. If you want to do a tracking shot in those days, rather than Steadicam, you had an Elimac dolly was one of the solutions, and that ran on a railway line, and the camera was mounted on a dolly which had got basically 4 wheels which locked onto the railway line and ran the railway line. So there was enough money to basically visual effects mounted the 4 Daleks on Elimac dollies. And we rented every piece of Elimac film railway track there was in the country for the show, painted it a sandy colour, and laid out, when we wanted to do a tracking shot, we laid out this railway line, put the Daleks onto these Elimac dolly bases, put them on the railway line, and the operators could then sit in there, but they couldn't paddle with their feet because the dollies, the construction of the dollies stopped them feet. So when the Daleks were moving with the actors, basically I assigned, there's one long shot where they're all going through the desert. So I used a shot where there was a bit of sand to mask where the railway line was, so you couldn't see it. And I assigned one doctor to every thing, and it was slightly downhill, very slightly downhill, but not but slightly too much. So I assigned one Dalek to each actor, and said, okay, so on action for this shot, each of you push your Dalek off and then walk beside it, so that it goes. So John was in the lead with the lead Dalek, played by, I can't remember, and I said action, and John gave this Dalek a great big push off, and the others did the same. And John's Dalek just sped away, and it developed a rattle. I mean, the wheels started rising on either side, and then from out of this little Dalek was going, help, 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 I can't stop, as he rocketed towards the end of the track, and the other 3 were following on and crashed in behind it. So that was the first retake, but it worked. In the end, it worked. Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to vent to the Cybermen. Of course, Cybermen, you've got Elizabeth Sladen and Ian Marter. Do you remember those 2?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, Liz, I almost drowned in Wookie Hole Caves, because in the Sea Devils I'd used there's a small cave. There's a small cave. There's a huge cave with a small lake in it in Wookie Hole, and on one side there's a sandbank, and on the other side there's another sandbank, and there's water in between, and it's part of a river. It's part of the huge underground river which is flowing through this cave system, and it then goes down underground. And I saw that, and there was a sequence where Liz is escaping from someone. I can't remember. Anyway, I thought it'd be great if these creatures the creatures that lived in the cave had got boats to paddle around with on the lakes, because that's a thing of the location. It wasn't in the script. The location offers you something. That we needed caves, needed a location, and in the caves were a lake, and so if you're anything of a director at all, you're going to find some way of using the lake into the story. So I went, oh yeah, those water scooters I used on the Sea Devils, and they were meant to be Sea Devil water scooters, or so I can't remember what. It's irrelevant. I went, yeah, these underground creatures can have those scooters. So we'll have a couple of those scooters back, and we'll let Liz jump onto a scooter and use the scooter to whiz across the lake from one side to the other. And Terry, who's the stuntman? Terry Walsh. Terry Walsh. So Terry's there being the stuntman, and I get Terry the guy who owns the scooters, All Spice Scooters, he showed Liz how it works and all the rest of it, and they actually had it ticking over for her. So she runs out of a cave onto a beach on the far side of this water. I'm on, across the water on the other side from her, jumps onto the scooter, pushes it into the water, sits on it, opens the throttle. It goes, the scooter doesn't behave properly. Liz falls into the water, which is icy cold, flowing quite fast towards a rock face where it disappears down for 2 or 3 miles. And Terry, God bless him, dives in and pulls her out. And was then in hospital for a few days because he hurt himself doing it.
Right.
But he saved Liz. And she had no complaints. I mean, what a lady. Came out of the freezing cold water, wrapped up by, given a hot coffee, wrapped up, put in a dry costume, and off again on the next shot. Brilliant lady. Love working with her. Absolutely love working with her.
I did get a chance to meet her at one of the Doctor Who conventions, and she was lovely to everybody, and one of those people that does meet your expectations. Not everybody does.
No, I mean, she was so smart. I love professionals. Do you know what I mean? I just love people who are really good and serious about what they're doing and make it look easy, even though it actually isn't. And Liz was a real professional, absolutely wonderful lady. Love working with her.
And Ian Marter, was he again good to work with?
Yeah, Ian was lovely. Yes, I mean, Ian didn't have very much in my story. I don't think there was that much for him to do within the story. I don't.
Yeah, I think that was a lot of it. Probably one of the reasons why he kind of went after that season was because he was kind of a third wheel. They never kind of really try to work out what to do with, really.
Yes, I mean, I got on fine with him. I no problems. I didn't have an extensive amount to do with him, so, and he didn't have to drive water scooters on icy cold lakes and things. So.
No. And of course, moving on to your final story and what I want to end on, Robots of Death, I would consider to be, maybe the best story, or certainly the top 2 or 3. Did you realise that would be? Do you sometimes get an idea of what's going to be iconic, or does that not kind of sort of figure into it at the time?
I had directed 3 or 4 Doctor Who's before Robots came along, and I had mixed feelings. Love doing Doctor Who, but I'd done enough, and I wanted to move on to other things. I was ambitious, and also I've got a very low boredom threshold, and I felt I had pretty well done everything there was with Doctor Who that there was to do. And although I was, flattered and pleased to be offered the job, and I took the job, and it was a sort of, the script was there because it was cheap. Chris Boucher had been commissioned. My understanding is that Chris had been commissioned to write something that all happened in basically one studio set, had no location filmings, didn't have expensive monsters in it, and the most important thing was no location filming and not a huge amount of sets to be built. So you just built one set, basically, and that was it for all 4 episodes. And that would save the budget for the year. So that's how Robots was commissioned, and that's how I'd read the script. And a bit like sort of, I was saying how if you're a director, locations or whatever offer you, they offer you go in caves, and there's a lake in the caves, and there's, blah, blah, blah. So when I got Robots, I just let my imagination. I didn't. If they fired me and never asked me to direct another Doctor Who ever again because I'd gone OTT, I'd gone overboard with it, I didn't care. I really didn't care, because I had lots of other jobs on offer and there were other things I wanted to do. So I thought I just went, I thought, what can I do? What can I do? Because this is basically do you remember Space 1999? Do you remember?
Yep.
That's what that script was. It
Hmm.
was a Space 90. Chris is a great writer. Chris is a highly, he did exactly what was required of him. And what came out was basically a Space 1999 story with white, upstanding, good-looking Brits running around this spaceship mining machine on a planet, being superheroes and having to deal with robots that are, iRobot, whatever.
Hmm.
I thought, oh, I mean, that's what it was. And I went, there's got to be more to it. And I was just, and in this life, you're lucky with the events in your life. A few weeks before, my cousin Lyle, who was in the Merchant Navy as a first officer, ship drew into Tilbury and he was bored and he phoned me up and said, why don't you bring your wife over and come and see my ship in Tilbury? And I'd love to show you over my ship. And I went, yeah, okay. I'm not sort of getting to Tilbury is a pain in the butt, and parking in Tilbury and finding a ship in Tilbury is all a pain in the butt. So anyway, got on board the ship, and it was amazing. I mean, oak paneling, beautiful carpets, nice pictures on the wall. I imagined it was going to be sort of, I don't know what I imagined, something out of the, some sort of rust bucket, I didn't realize that the Merchant Navy have got this problem that because guys go off for 3 months, because the crew goes off for 3 months at a time, you've got to have reasonable living accommodation for them. You've got to have a cinema. I mean, in those days, there wasn't the internet and there wasn't cassettes even, really. You've got to have a cinema, you've got to have a gym, you've got to have a nice restaurant, you've got to have a nice convivial area, you've got to have nice cabin, you've got to have nice living conditions. And in fact, merchant crews, certainly the officers, are encouraged to have their wives come along for the 3-month trip. Please, yes, bring your wife. But of course, the wives come for 1 3-month trip, end up in Tilbury and they end up in Tilbury's all over the world. They go to Hong Kong, they end up in Tilbury, the equivalent of Tilbury. They don't end up in nice places. They end up in horrible dockyards everywhere. So they never come. They do 1 3-month trip and never come. So the Merchant Navy has got this problem that it needs to make the accommodation and living facilities for its crew as nice as possible. And I was really, really surprised. And I realized that Lyle, on board this ship, led quite a relatively elegant lifestyle. The downside being he's away from home for 3 months. So I sat and thought, well, if you're going off on a space miner, then it's not going to be 3 months. It's going to be 6 months or a year or whatever. I mean, you're not going to ship them out to the planet for whatever. Then I went, and of course, if we did that, they could have their own. They could have their own decor. They could, and if you don't do. And it was also the time of David Bowie. It was also the time where David Bowie had started wearing makeup and I went, well, my original idea was that I'm quite into, if I win Euro Millions and I build myself my own place in Biscayne Bay, I quite like a Roman villa with the swimming pool in the middle and the piers. And I quite like the whole sort of Roman thing. And I quite like Roman costumes and I quite like all that. And the only bit of design thing really in the whole show at that stage was the space miner, which worked with jets sort of doing it. And so the designer said to me, I'd really like to see how mining, open cast mining works. So for some reason, it was an aeroplane. I can't remember, it's very on BBC, but for some reason we were sat in this aeroplane together. Could have been a railway train, but I think it was an aeroplane. And I said to the designer, look, we've got to have some fun. We've got to do something with this. So I did this stuff about how I thought, the design thing, and I thought how they could have their accommodation could be whatever design it was they want, because actually you would almost flick your fingers and AI would make the accommodation be designed whatever it was. So he said, yeah. So we went down and we saw these Dubras that were doing it, and he said, yeah, I'm not sure about. He said, let me think about it. Can I come up to your office? Can I come to your office tomorrow? When after we get back, give me a day, and then I'll come to your office and talk to you about this. And he bowled into my office with a load of design books from the BBC library, and said, "Do you know what Art Deco is?" And I said, "Well, no. I mean, I think they have it in Miami. I think that's what." He said, "Look," and he opened up these books. He said, "This is all Art Deco." He said, "We could have an Art Deco set, and we could have Art Deco props, and we could have, and those sofas actually are around. They've just been rediscovered and recovered. Those sofas from I think quite recently. I had a PA girl on to me a little while ago, and I said, then we could have Art Deco robots. And he said, yes, we could, exactly. We could have Art Deco robots. We could have the whole thing. And I said, and of course they don't have to be wearing Space 1999 costumes, because it's free. I mean, they're not actually manual. They could have beautiful costumes. They could have whatever costumes they want. And I said, and they wouldn't all be British. There'd be, and so I did the full. So what evolved out of that was I did multicultural casting, which today is nothing. But if you look at that show, it is, there's hardly a straight white, David Bailey perhaps, and there's hardly a straight white, good-looking, tall, elegant. So I cast the thing multiculturally, and then this whole design thing seemed to me like the most exciting thing in the entire project. So I said to costume department, to makeup department, and to phys effects, I'm not a design expert. I'm not, I really don't know about these things. So I just want one look for this. So every design decision that is made on this show is to go through the designer. Is to go through. He must be consulted, and he'll control everything. And I recently had the lady who actually made the masks, who designed and made the masks for the robots. She's a sculptress, worked briefly at the BBC, and she's a sculptress. Great website, which I can't remember the name of. And the designer met with her and said, we want these sort of Art Deco robots. And he did sort of something on a napkin in the canteen at the BBC, and she took the napkin off, and she came up with a design for the heads and so that show was, the producer frankly didn't know what I was doing. He didn't know what I was casting. I mean, casting, because he saw it as, he thought we were doing Space 1999 with good-looking guys and whatever, and he had no idea what I was up to. And I spent a lot of effort sort of not discussing it, because I didn't want to have discussions about it. And so that's how it happened. So for me, it was the far end of going, I've got nothing to lose. I'm just going to do everything that my imagination fancies on this production. I'm just going to do it.
Yeah.
Of course, because the show has got a lot of recognition, I have immense, fondness for the show. I probably like the Sea Devils best, because I had the most fun doing that. That was, I'm into boats and sailing, and so the sea is very close to my heart. But robots was just, it was a load of camp fun that we took. For example, I got the thing of making the robots. One of the failures of Cybermen was I tried to get them speaking with I cast actors rather than extras, and I tried to get them speaking inside their masks, and the audio didn't work very well for them. So it ended up having to be post-sunk and all post-syncing it all. But so I had the robots masks, had sound department come in and have the masks designed so that there could be radio mics inside, lavalier mics, I guess, inside the masks, so that the real actors could speak as they were doing it. And I cast very highly qualified actors to be those robots. And with them, we developed a way of walking, we developed a way of talking, and we developed this thing of whatever happened. Because if you're going to have domestic robots, if I'm going to have a domestic robot looking after my apartment here, it's going to be somebody I find is pleasant company, that I like talking to, that is nice. So the whole thing about these robots was they had to be very nice. So with the actors, we developed a style where they were totally friendly, and everything they said was charming and friendly to make you, the receiver, happy and contented, because they talked in a charming voice all the time, and they were really helpful with you. And if they played chess, yes, they would take you up to the brink, but ultimately, of course, they'd let you win. So the actors. So when we had extras, we had one or two extras would also be robots. The actors then taught the extras how to do the walk, how to do that's robots.
Oh yeah, I think it works really well, because you say you've got actors, very good actors playing, even nothing's overlooked. It's all kind of on a very high level. We haven't mentioned Tom Baker. I just wanted to know what it was like working with Tom. And
Tom's lovely, absolutely lovely, real pleasure to work with Tom. Yeah, absolute joy.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a feeling that Wookie Ho, what was that? Cybermen. I have a feeling that was either the first or the second, but I think it was the first show that Tom was actually shooting in.
Yes,
it was transmitted third or fourth. But Barry, quite rightly, had this theory that the very first episode that somebody like a new doctor comes into, the first show that's transmitted shouldn't be the first show he records. He needs time to get into the swing of it. So I inherited, Tom inherited John Pertwee scripts, of course, because no writer had seen Tom, no writer had seen Tom acting, no writer had seen Tom's interpretation of the Doctor. So basically, there was a John Pertwee script that was handed to Tom, and Tom had very distinct ideas as to how he wanted to portray his version of the Doctor, which was primarily non-violent, primarily was getting out of problems by wit, and was by appearing to be eccentric when in fact that's a disguise for other things. So there were problems for Tom. I mean, in these shows, you do the filming before you do the studio. So there we were on location, with Tom being asked to do violent things to solve problems. And Tom took a lot of trouble to get to know me before we went filming. I mean, he took me to the cinema to see his Sinbad. He invited me to dinner at his place with his girlfriend, with my wife. I mean, he wanted to get to know me as a person before we started working together, which is, that's a smart move, because it means when on location you're going to go, and I'm saying, right, Tom, you do this, and you hit him in the stomach, because that's what it says in the script. He says, Michael, I think that's a pretty boring way to do it. I don't think it's very smart doing all that, and I hate the whole violent thing. There must be a witch. To which I am easy enough with Tom to go, fine, Tom, how do you see it? And he said, well, what I could do is I could go over that, and I could throw some moon dust in the faces, and I could slide around. And you go, yeah, okay, sure. And so very easy to work with because the guy knew what he wanted, and he wasn't saying, I won't do it. He wasn't going to say, he was just saying, could we look at a better, wittier way of doing it? And he had planned out what the solution was. Although years later, or a couple of years later in Robots, we were doing a corridor scene with robots coming up the corridor and the space captain. And Tom, I said, well, this is what we're going to do. And Tom went, oh, for Christ's sake, that's so boring. It really... So I went, okay, Tom, what do you want to do? And he went, well, I could... what I could do is I could run across there, I could climb on the side of that pillar, I could get onto the top of it, I could then swing across onto there, and I could jump down behind it, and then I could put... Or alternatively, I could do just what you said. Because he knew on a location, you can do anything that's reasonably reasonable on a filming. In a TV studio, there's no way. There is no way.
Would
So
you...
no, I mean, I love working with Tom. Absolutely loved it. Enormous respect for him. He was always the consummate professional, and I love professionals.
And obviously, by the time Robots came along, very established and very sort of caring about the role. Did you have much to do with the writers in any of the stories? Or was it just very much here's the script, off you go, sort of thing?
Oh, it's very much here's the script, off you go. Except, for example, Cybermen, and in fact, you never got a complete script. I mean, you were lucky. 6-week run-up, you walk into the office, and if there's one episode of the 6 or 4 sitting there on the desk, you are very, very lucky. I mean, it's a real sort of, there's episode 1, and you read episode 1, and there's another 5 episodes to come, and you can't really, you don't know. So you were just grateful as the days, weeks went by that you actually got the other scripts. On Cybermen, I walked in, I think, was that a 4-parter? It might have been a 4-parter.
4, yeah.
Yeah, it was another one of those scripts that was written to be economical. I think it was all in... Was it all in one set? The studio.
I mean, the Ark in space elements of it, of course, that was built for 2 stories. So yeah, there was the economical side to
That's right. So yeah, that was that. So with that, I walked in and there were 6 scripts sitting on my desk. And I read the first script, and a Cyberman appears at the end of the first script. And it was sort of okay. I read the second script, and it was much like the first script, except that 2 Cybermen appeared at the end of the second episode. And I read the third script, and that was sort of, except 3. This actually just is. And so I picked up all 3 scripts and went up to Barry's office and said, Barry, they're awful. And he said, I have got 6 scripts sitting on the desk on your first day of work on the production, and you say they're awful. And I say, Barry, having 6 scripts is wonderful, but they are awful. They are truly awful. And he went, yeah, okay. And we then proceeded to spend the next 3 weeks waiting for the rewrites to come in. And I think they were, what do I remember about Cybermen? Not a lot, actually. Yeah, but Barry got them changed, rewritten, new storylines introduced, sorted it out, and we ended up with 4 good scripts.
Yeah. Did you find that Philip Hinchcliffe was? Did you have a good relationship with him? It sounded like he kind of sort of let you get on with your design, and
I never really. I mean, Philip was if you like, a trainee producer under Barry. So it was Barry that gave me robots, really.
Hmm.
I mean, Philip was told Michael Briant's directing robots. Yeah, I got on fine. Philip was fine. He was still very much in this sort of learning curve to. Doctor Who was a show where if you were a director or if you were a producer, it either made or broke you.
Yeah.
You either went on to greater things or you didn't. Very tough show, Doctor Who, for directors and producers.
Yeah. And another person coming up in the ranks on Colony in Space was John Nathan Turner.
Yes.
Did you have much to do with John? Any recollections of him?
What did John Nathan do on Colony? Sorry.
He was assistant floor manager on
Oh
Colony.
yeah, I mean, obviously, yeah, I mean, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew John Nathan. I mean, I knew John from, John was an ASM. John was one of the nice things about Threshold House, if you like, where Margot Hayo was, who is still around, and we're still in touch after 50 years, 60 years, or whatever, 60 years maybe. Is it was quite a family. We were on 2 floors of Threshold House. Wasn't that big. They were all drama serials offices, and you walk down that corridor, and there were classic serials. There were Z Cars. There were Doctor Who. There were the Doctors. There were everybody. We all knew each other. There was no proper canteen until the very latter days of it. So you ate at your desk. You went downstairs and you got sandwiches and things, or you went across the street on Shepherd's Bush Green to that potato place where you were able to buy a potato filled with, I can't remember what they were called, Potato Plus or something. So it was serials was very much a family. So we all knew each other, even if we didn't necessarily work together that much. We all knew each other. So John Nathan was the ASM, was he
on Colony? Yes, and he probably was around in a number of other stories as well. I believe.
Is that John Nathan?
I think it's credited.
Yeah, because the PA was who's now a director, who's now a very famous director. Oh yeah, John Nathan. Well, great. Yes, I mean, I'm not being. Yeah. Hey. I got on fine with John. I did ask. I had a sort of bad point in my career. I'd had a film company which went bankrupt, and I went, oh, hey, no problem. I don't care. Not my money, really, except I need another job. So I thought, oh, fine. So I wrote a couple of letters to people going, hey, this is me. You've got a job. If you need a director, have script, we'll come and direct you. And I actually discovered it was quite a problem for producers that I'd been a real life producer, that I'd been a producer who'd been to Los Angeles and to the film festival at Cannes, and I'd run a film company. I never was a producer. It was not my métier. I'm not a producer, I'm a director. And a few of them would write back, but John never came back.
Oh.
I actually phoned up once and went, hey, can I speak to John? And his secretary went, no, he's not available, I'm afraid. And I went, really? Oh, okay. But John had a theory that he didn't want experienced directors working on Doctor Who because they would just be doing the same old thing all over again. And if he had new directors who had never directed Doctor Who or anything like it, he would get a more imaginative, creative production. I'm told.
Yeah, and whether or not the new series producers have a similar theory, because of course, apart from Graham Harper, none of you guys were invited back to do the relaunch of the series in 2005.
Yeah, but Yeah, Graham was who I was thinking here. He was the PA on Colony. Absolutely, don't forget him. Yes, Graham. I was going to say Graham's younger than me. He's not that much. He's about 5, 6, 7, 8 years younger than me, if that. He was certainly junior to me in drama school, but then I would have thought only 2 or 3 years. Yeah, Graham certainly managed to make the transition. I think most of us Graham had a real battle. Graham had to fight tooth and nail, which is a shame because he's incredibly talented, to get from PA to director. And that wasn't helped by the trouble he got into on Colony in Space, getting me those brilliant halflingers and things. I mean, he got into a lot of trouble going out on a limb for me, which I didn't know about until more recently. So he had a real battle to get on the director's course. He had a real battle to make the transition. And he didn't make the transition until quite a lot later in his life. Whereas I made the transition from PA to director in my 20s. You know, I was a director at 25, I think. I did my first job as a director. So I directed for years and years and years. And people like Dougie Camfield and Vic Rotellis were a bit older than me. Hugh David, all those people were all as old as me or older, maybe by a decade or so. So by the time the new series came along, we were getting on a bit and not available. And I actually had to stop directing in my 50s because my wife got Alzheimer's and we were living in France, and French lady, and she got Alzheimer's and I couldn't leave her. I couldn't go back to England and direct because I couldn't leave her alone in the house, and I couldn't have people there. Well, I couldn't afford to have people there 24/7. I mean, it cost too much. So my career came to an abrupt halt. So even had I been asked, I couldn't have done it. And I certainly wasn't asked. And you're right. Graham, because he developed somewhat later, was around later on in Doctor Who, and he made the transition. I gather his modern episodes are very good indeed. Very, very good.
Oh, yeah. Again, I think it's some of the best episodes. And I know I spoke to Boris Hussein, of course, did the very first Doctor Who story, and I asked him the same question. He, I think, would have been quite interested to direct it, but the BBC had no kind of sort of feeling that, you know, they'd either want to do it or it would work, sort of thing. So just a couple of questions to finish off, if I may. I was just wondering, did you prefer 4-part or 6-part stories? Was there a sort of benefit to a shorter construct, or did you have more time to breathe on a 6-parter?
Barry always said that what we should be doing is doing 4-parters because there's almost no story that can't be told well in a 4-parter. When you're doing a 6-parter, there's a sort of lull around episodes 4 or 5 where not a lot happens and everyone's treading water a bit. And the reason that you have 6-parters is it's cheaper. Once you've established the set, the costumes, done the location filming, it is a lot less money per episode than doing a 4-parter where you've got the same price for the set, same price for the costume, same price for the props and so on. So don't mind.
It again depends on the story and everything like that, I suppose. I was just thinking about some of the actions. There are lots of action sequences in Doctor Who, and you've got people like Dinny Powell, Alf Joint working on those shows. Do you remember much of the stunt teams and Alf and Dinny?
Havoc. Those were the days where on Colony, I think I had 8 stuntmen there for a week, just doing stunts. I mean, impossible. I mean, out of all budgetary possibilities today, I would have thought. I don't know what the modern, but I don't see it. I don't see the modern shows really. The stuntmen were great. I mean, I loved the whole stunt atmosphere. I loved guys coming out of windows, dropping 30 feet onto cardboard boxes, I love the fights. I love the horse riding. You know, I mean, when you were doing classic serials, if you have knights in armor, you know, that's Alf Joint in a suit with a spear thing, a lance. No, I love the stuntmen. I mean, I love Stuart Fell. You know, I mean, I was doing a secret army where, again, which was about the blowing up, the resistance blowing up a German convoy. And I just, you know, the way it's written whatever it's written. But I wanted half a dozen stunts in it, and I couldn't afford half a dozen stuntmen. So Stuart Fell did half a dozen stunts. I mean, he crashed a motorcycle. He came on fire out of a burning lorry. He fell down a cliff. He shot backwards off. You know, Stuart just did in one day. He did 6 stunts for 6 different characters brilliantly, without even, you know, just like that. Yeah, no, I did a thing called Blood Money, which was originally going to be called Blood Royal, about the kidnapping of a royal child, but it somehow escaped the notice of the BBC Palace liaison department. And so until the show was actually in production, the Palace and the BBC liaison with the Palace didn't know this show was happening. And the Palace went, it was about the kidnapping of a royal child, not of the King or Queen, but of a royal child by IRA type people. Very good show, Bernie Hepton. And it was about the SAS. The denouement is the SAS capturing all this, and the couple of stuntmen I had were actually ex-SAS, and so they were there for SAS. And it was a total. It was a very serious piece of theatre. You know, I mean, it wasn't. Everything I did in it had to be truthful and real, and everything else. And in the denouement, which is the SAS capturing and killing the antagonists, the IRA, the group of people, it was being shot. They were meant to be holed up in a house in Slough. And I said to my 2 stunt guys, what I'd really like is, what do you reckon about them? I'd like to see them on the rooftops, you know, because they're going to come in through windows, and I'd like to see them on the roof. Do you reckon that's at night? This is at night. And they went, yeah, no, we can do that. We can have them on the rooftop for you. We can do that. And I was going to film it with night image intensifiers on the camera. So I couldn't light it. I mean, I couldn't light a whole street. I couldn't light a whole whatever. Well, I mean, I could, but I just thought it was more interesting to show it the way it was being observed by the SIS, the Special Intelligence Service, on monitors. So it was agreed. So the night we're shooting it, it's pouring with rain. I mean, bucketing down. And, you know, there's 200 yards of rooftops. And some guys say, yeah, well, they'll come up. You won't see them arrive on the rooftop, Michael, because they'll come out of the darkness. They'll arrive over there. We talk to the cameraman, the cameraman. I mean. So if you pick them up there, and you'll be able to see them coming across the rooftop and pan them across. And in the pouring rain, at night, in for them, total darkness, well, very little ambient light, these SAS guys did just that. I mean, they came across and they ran across these roofs silently, absolutely, and then came down, abseiled down, went into the windows. And then the stuntmen, they told me, they orchestrated the whole gunfight thing. They said, well, when we're taking out these people, 1 or 2 of the terrorists run out into the street. And they are shot by, obviously they're shot by snipers, but you can't be sure they're dead. So the SAS guys come in because they may well be carrying large packs of explosive vests, whatever. And they said, well, what we do is we throw ourselves on top of them and then we roll the body over so they're facing upwards. So if they have got explosives, their charge will blow upwards and their bodies will more or less protect us from the, God, blimey, would you do that? Not in a million years. No, and then they took me to the pub, and they really were king and country. They really were. I found it almost frightening how loyal they were to the concept of the Queen and the Empire, and how ruthless they were.
Yeah.
And how tough they were. And I've met sailing. I've met a couple of special services guys with boats, and they are really bright, smart, clever, intelligent, but so tough people. One I saw, he would go out for a run. He was retired Army. He was a retired Special Services, but obviously still in Special Services, and still on. He was off to Libya or Iran or something. Because if I'm sure it's happening now. I mean, if you want deniability, you have people who are not in the army go forth and do it, whatever it is they need to do. But they're not in the army, so it's complete. But in fact, they are, because he would go out for a run. I was in marina in Spain. It was a bit of a wreck of a marina. We were there with bad weather. Every morning he would get out and he would run for 5 miles every morning, and then 5 miles in the heat. You know, he wouldn't wait until the cool of the morning or the cool of the night. He would just do it twice a day. Tough as a great guy, absolutely great guy. His wife would run for 3 miles every day, but only once.
Yeah.
Sorry, I digress.
No, that's very interesting. I just want to ask what, penultimately, what your favourite project of your career was. Is there one that you was particularly fond of?
Probably A Tale of Two Cities.
I did have that on my list to ask you about, yes.
Yeah, I mean, probably A Tale of Two Cities was the show. Well, okay, so there was Tale of Two Cities, and there was Hideaway, which I've already mentioned, which was a 6-hour film, 6 50-minute episode film, all on location. I loved doing that, although I had a producer who was probably not the brightest light on the Christmas tree. I loved doing Secret Army. I felt I matured as a director. I thought I became an adult director on Secret Army. That was a brilliant show to do, absolutely brilliant. I hadn't been scared for a lot of years because I'd done an awful lot of work before I did Secret Army. But walking into that rehearsal room with Clifford Rose, Bernie Hampton, all of them, Valentine Dial, I'd actually worked with in Where the Rainbow Ends as a child actor aged 13 at the Royal Festival Hall. I loved Secret Army. Secret Army was a joy to do, absolute joy. So I guess I don't have a favorite. I mean, Blood Money was good. Blood Money was good. Treasure Island was okay. It's not a show that you're ever going to, because Treasure Island, there's been so many versions of it, and so you're never going to. And it's a great story. It's a great story, but you're never going to do it as well as the book. The book is just. But no, I guess A Tale of Two Cities, Secret Army, Blood Money, for me were, and always the next show.
Yes, I was thinking ahead and
always the next show,
next project. Because Tale of Two Cities, you adapted that, didn't you? I think you had a look.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, and I got called Peter Harding. I mean, Barry wouldn't. I wasn't allowed to do it under my own name. The adaptation that we had was a disaster, And so as it got nearer and nearer, I just took it home. But to say I adapted it, I did adapt it, but basically I just went back to Dickens. That wasn't what the BBC did. The BBC philosophy in drama department, which in some cases, like Ivanhoe, for example, was absolutely the right thing to do. You read the book, threw it away, and wrote the script. That was the philosophy in classic serials. And frequently, with something, I don't know if you've ever read Ivanhoe, I tried to read it once. Oh,
yeah,
very difficult. So you throw the script away. So you throw the book away and write the script. All I did was just to go back to Dickens, page by page by page, and just put on the script what Mr. Dickens wrote. And interestingly enough, where I am here in Boulogne-sur-Mer is where Dickens lived for 6 years, here in the old town. That wall behind me is the wall of the oldest town in Boulogne-sur-Mer. There's a pub called the Vole Hole, and my kitchen is part of the 1650 or something, when it was part of a coaching entrance to a hostelry here in the old town of Boulogne-sur-Mer. And Dickens lived here, and the walk around the battlements of the old town is called the Dickens Walk.
Wow.
And Dickens' mistress used to live 12 miles down the road.
Right.
So for me, Tale of Two Cities, Dickens, yeah.
Well, that's fabulous, and I think you got an Emmy, wasn't it, for that as well?
Yeah, the show got an Emmy. Yeah, we got an Emmy. Barry and I got an Emmy for that. Yeah.
And just to finish off, I just wonder where your love of sailing kind of began, and then sort of how it kind of became this film course that now is your main focus.
Make no mistake about it, I'm a director. I mean, my love has always been the entertainment industry. That's always been my first love. But I've always adored, as a hobby, messing about in boats. So when I was a kid in Maidenhead, I lived quite close to the River Thames, and I used to renovate canvas canoes, which I would get for like people. Well, people would give them to you because nobody wanted these. They're a bit like cockleshell hero canoes, where you do that, and they're covered in canvas on wood slats, and you just paint it with Dulux or something, and they're waterproof more or less. So I did that. Then my mama, who'd grown up in Poole, taught me to sail on the River Thames in a dinghy, and I just love. I used to go off in the canoes, camping. Just take a thermos flask and a tent and paddle up the river. So I've just always messed around in boats. When I had, I was talking about Pat Troughton and his enterprise, I had a mirror dinghy that I actually built in my garage. I couldn't afford to buy a boat, but my wife gave me a mirror dinghy kit for Christmas. And I built the kit in my back garden and sailed my dinghy. And then in my 30s, while I was doing Warship, which was actually a show I enjoyed tremendously, I was driving frequently down to Portsmouth, and I was driving past a boatyard that had got a 22-foot boat for sale, a second-hand 22-foot, bit like a folk boat, called a galleon, plastic version of a folk boat, really. And I used to drive past it, and a Royal Navy commander, retired commander, who was providing a boat that we were using on one of my episodes of Warship. I became great friends with him and talked about this for a boat. And he said, "Michael, just buy the boat." He said, "The best thing you'll do in your life is to buy a boat. Just buy it and forget about it." So I took out a huge, great bank loan because I had no money. And directors weren't well paid in those days. It wasn't. The BBC is not what it is today. I mean, people like me were badly paid.
Yeah.
So I took this huge bank loan and I bought this 22-foot galleon and had it on truck moorings on the River Hamble. And 3 weeks after I'd got it and I'd finished whatever the production was, I sold it to Cherbourg. And back again. And I've just always, I reckoned there was a year when I was directing in my late 30s, 40s maybe, when something like 7 directors died of heart attacks in the business, in the television industry. And actually, it's quite a small, there aren't that many directors. So for 7, because the stresses were enormous. The stresses were seriously big. And I always reckon the reason I survived was because I'd go down to the boat at weekends or midweek, because very often as a director you would be working, you'd be working over weekends. I'd go down to the boat and I'd go sailing. And sailing is something where you can't control the wind, you can't control the tides, you can't control the sea, all you can do is sail your boat and navigate a bit. And you have to be cool. You can't panic, because if you panic, something horrid will happen to you. And I always reckoned it was sailing that kept me going, that kept me alive, that kept me not getting, that enabled me to stand on location with everything collapsing around you and go, okay, guys, what we'll do is this.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful to sailing. And I spoke earlier, I never finished the story about my Palliard Bolex film camera, which I bought when I was 13 or 14 as a child actor, and started making my little films, which enabled me to become a very young teledirector. And now I've got a YouTube channel with 16,000 subscribers, and I make little films with my GoPro cameras and my little things, and I'm still here editing and at the other end of my life, I'm still here making little films. So my life has come a sort of full circle from a kid making films to a grown-up human being making little films.
Yeah. So you're able to combine the two passions in this very nice symbiotic way.
Yeah.
And you still sail as much as you can, and
my boat's in Martinique. I'm in the West Indies. My channel is called At Sailing Gently. We'll find the YouTube channel.
Yeah.
My boat's in Martinique. I'm going to fly out to Spain in a few weeks' time, get my teeth fixed, and that'll take a week or a fortnight, and then I'll fly out to Martinique and I'll go sailing again, if the hurricane season lets me, in between the hurricanes.
It's a bit unpredictable, isn't it, at the moment?
No, I still sail. I sailed around the world. I sailed a 36-foot yacht around the world. So I can't physically do that anymore. So I've got a relatively small sailboat where I can do everything from the cockpit. I can anchor it, I can hoist the sails, reef the sails, navigate everything from the cockpit, so I don't have to run around on deck too much, because one of the pleasures of, let me assure you, there are absolutely no pleasures whatsoever in getting older. It's downhill. There's nothing nice about it at all. So, and I have to recognize I'm not as nimble and fast moving as I used to be. So I have a boat that I can handle, that I can park, and it isn't too far to get from behind the wheel to the shore to tie the boat up. So it's a smaller boat than I've had for a long time. It's a 10-meter boat. It's 32 foot, 31 foot, 32 foot. And yeah, I can't wait to get back on board. Can't wait to go sailing.
And in those days when you were circumnavigating the globe, how long would it take you to sort of do such an expedition?
That took a couple of years. I mean, I had 4 or 5 years in the Mediterranean between directing jobs. I would direct for a bit, and then when the job stopped, I'd fly down to wherever I left the boat, get on the boat and sail it a bit more around the Med. And then another job had arrived, so I'd put it in a marina, get in a jet plane, do the job, and then go sailing again. And I got bored with 4 or 5 years in the Med, got as far as Turkey. So I went off to the Caribbean. So I sailed it to the Caribbean, and I had 2 or 3 years in the Caribbean, sailed up the east coast of America to the Chesapeake, to Washington, D.C., came back, still doing the occasional job, got the boat back into the Caribbean and went, I don't know, I think I'll go to the Pacific. I think I'll go to Panama. So I sailed via Venezuela and the ABC Islands to Panama, went through the Panama Canal, got a phone call I've just got through the Panama Canal, it's a big deal, Panama Canal, for a person in a little boat. And I got a full call from my agent saying, I've got a job for you, 3 months in Amsterdam directing a situation comedy. And I went, 3 months in Amsterdam. I've done a load of sitcoms and stuff in the Netherlands. 3 months there, or going to Tahiti, Bora Bora, Fiji, Tonga. Do you know something? I think I'm going to go sailing. And actually, for the first time in my life, turned down a job to go sailing.
Yeah.
So I went off and I sailed across the South Pacific.
Yeah.
Got to adventure Fiji, Tonga, Somalia, the Cook Islands. Wonderful time, absolutely magical time. Flew back to England, sold with my wife. We sold our house in England, moved to La Rochelle. I flew back down to New Zealand, picked up the boat, sailed it to Cairns. She came out to Cairns and joined me in Cairns. And we sailed to Darwin and then through Asia, went to see Komodo dragons, sailed to Phuket, sailed to Sri Lanka, sailed to Oman, left Oman to sail to the Red Sea, got halfway across the Gulf of Aden, got attacked by pirates, Somalian pirates, got robbed, boarded, robbed, shot at, all this. Got through that, got into Djibouti, got my equipment and my money replaced in Djibouti, sailed the boat back to La Rochelle. So that was my circumnavigation. So that was over a period of 2-3 years. Great, magical.
Yeah, sounds very, very exciting. Was there one particular place that you visited for your sailing that you absolutely loved?
Well, I guess there was an island called Suvorov in the South Pacific, in the north of the Cook Islands, that very few boats go to. It was only discovered by a Russian merchant ship by accident about 60 or 70 years ago. There's a lagoon there, so you have to find a very narrow entrance and sail into the lagoon to drop anchor. There's a couple of Cook Island rangers there, and the only boats that ever visit are boats like mine. So there were a couple of other sailboats in there. There was a guy called Neil, Nigel Neil, something like Neil. There's a buried treasure there. A pirate ship, a load of pirates, a real-life pirate ship back in the Robert Louis Stevenson days, buried a treasure there. And this New Zealand, Australian author called Neil went and got a ship to deposit him on the island, and he lived there for 5 years trying to find the treasure. He did find some stuff on a reef from that period, but he never found the actual treasure. Anyway, he wrote a book about it, and I went to the island. I didn't look for the treasure. I mean, it was just to go ashore, and the Cook Rangers guys said, because I went there with my papers, because I go as captain of the ship, skipper. You go ashore with your ship's papers and the boats and the passports of the crew and so on. And they went, forget that. He said, listen, would you like to come and have dinner with us tonight? We're going to have a barbecue tonight. We're inviting the other 2 yachts to welcome your boat and your 3 crew in. We'll catch the fish. We'll do the fish. We'll do the meal. We haven't got any booze, so you have to bring the booze. And I mean, a magical evening in the South Pacific with the crews of a couple of other boats, all sitting round a wooden table these Cook Islanders had built on planks, eating fish which they'd cooked in a barbecue in the sand. They would build a fire in the sand, a bit like you do hedgehogs, I think. The most magical evening, absolutely magical. And my crew were all musicians. One played a little electronic, one played the guitar, and one played a flute. Great, magic, absolute magic.
Yeah, it sounds like a fantastic experience and all the things
Yeah,
that sailing's brought you. Yeah. So, well, I think that's probably a lovely story to end it on. Thank you very much, Michael, for
absolute pleasure.
having such a lovely chat. It's been
Nice
wonderful.
and thank you for such a nice interview. That's actually gone, for me, that's been really nice. You made it really easy for me. It's been very good. I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
Oh, that's very kind of you to say so. It's been well. It's always lovely when somebody's easy to talk to as you. It always
E
helps.
Email me a link to your site because I did find it and then I lost it, and I'll put a plug for your site up.
Oh, that'd be lovely. That's very kind. I should say. Thank you very much. Well,
Okay.
have enjoy the rest of your day and take care.
Pleasure. See you.
Bye, Michael.
Bye bye now. Bye.
Bye.